Good evening. It is Monday, September the 26th, about 10:30 p.m. This is Shay Gibson with Weather Flow and Wind Alert, bringing you a Tropics update. So we're watching Invest 97L make its way across the tropical Atlantic right now. Current position somewhere between about 12 and 14 degrees north and about 51 degrees west. If we look at the latitude and longitude, it puts it in a little bit more perspective. This system is heading to the west-northwest at about 20 miles per hour, so it's moving along pretty quick, but it is expected to slow down as it approaches the Lesser Antilles and actually start to strengthen. So there's a lot of model guidance that are being a little bit aggressive on building the system into a tropical name status as it enters into the Lesser Antilles and Leeward Islands. So the next name up would be Matthew. It would be Tropical Storm Matthew once named. We're not sure if it's going to be depression first or if it may go ahead right into a tropical storm status. This broad level area of rotation for a tropical wave is rather impressive. It's holding together very well. There's a little bit of south to north shear going on just ahead of it to the west. You can see some of the cloud tops being blown off here to the west and northwest side of the system. So there may be some limiting and capability of further development overnight tonight, but as it moves to the west-northwest, it should escape that line of upper shear and move into an area more favorable for development. Put things in perspective, this is Barbados, which is just east of the Lesser Antilles, so you can see how fast that this system is closing in on it. Some of those outwards effects will probably or likely see Barbados by tomorrow midday to afternoon, and then the Lesser Antilles and those areas will start to see those effects into tomorrow night. If we look at the National Hurricane Center, we see that they are giving this a high probability, 80% chance for the next 48 hours and 90% chance the next 5 days as it continues to head to the west-northwest. Beyond the 5 days in this cone of uncertainty, there is exactly that, a lot of uncertainty as to which way the system is going to go beyond that. So that's kind of a very, very tricky setup, and we're going to talk about that in just a minute on the different modeling, mainly going to the GFS and Euro modeling here. The Euro keeps it a little bit more south and west for a little bit longer. The GFS brings it up a little bit further to the north and then brings it up and across the Dominican Republic and up and out to sea. And we'll talk about that as well. But for right now, let's take a quick look at Datascope, our Datascope viewer. We can see some of the winds around this coming up to about 29 miles an hour at the Mid-Atlantic buoy here. We also have the West Atlantic buoy showing 22 to 27 miles an hour. So there's definitely a wind field increasing around this broad area of a tropical wave. It's a rather impressive tropical wave on satellite. So tomorrow this could get upgraded to a tropical depression. We just don't know yet. It looks like some of the winds in this, even the advanced scatterometer readings that we were looking at, were sitting at about 25 knots. We hadn't seen 30 or 35 knots yet, but with such a broad area of rotation like this, it's likely that it could make tropical storm status very quickly and not even have time to be a tropical depression as it moves into the more favorable area for development. So real quick, I wanted to, this system has come a long way off the coast of Africa, and all these oranges and reds, this is called the Saharan air layer map, and this is a measurement of how much dust is in the air coming off continental Africa. So a lot of times we see low-level jetting coming across continental Africa, and it kicks up Saharan dust up into the air, which is then suspended and are lifted and suspended at about 18,000 feet at the mid-levels. And a lot of systems that come off of Africa, especially closer to the Cape Verde Islands right here, ingest a lot of this drier air into it and into the core, and then they never have a chance of developing because all this dry air dissipates the system. But this one came off a little bit lower at a lower latitude, really right here at about 10 degrees, and it really just is kind of trucked along underneath and ridden underneath this dry air to the north, and hasn't been able to ingest that dry air to dissipate it. So it's been successful at holding together and keeping away from that dry air, especially the further west it goes, the less of a chance it has of having those effects. We can see that in the total precipitable water, with the system being right here with a nice moisture shield, and you can see how low it came off the African coast right here and then came across this 10-degree line, and then now it is right about here, and it's got this moisture shield intact with all the drier air just staying to the north. You can see all this dry air coming across, and that's coming around a giant ridge and some Saharan dust mixed in along the upper divergence of that. So that's kind of the history track, as the system has had a very successful path being at the lower latitude. So here we go with the GFS model, and this is going to bring it in across the Lesser Antilles, and then it's going to drop in pressure, which means it's going to strengthen once it goes over the Lesser Antilles and even cutting across it. And this is all being guided by ridge up here to the northeast. This is all high pressure. This is clockwise rotation up and around this ridge, and the GFS has been pretty persistent on keeping the system turning to the north. In fact, if we go up a couple more frames, we see that it continues west for a little bit along these easterly trades, and then it starts to steer north and cut up and across the Dominican Republic, but not before strengthening to a possible hurricane status as it goes north across the Dominican Republic and then keeps on going out to sea. So this is getting pretty far out. We're talking 186 hours here. Right now, I would say the margin of error really is going to become very erroneous after about 5 days. So I think we really should keep this in perspective, not going too far out in these models to determine which track it's going to take, because there's so many different variables going on with which way it could go. So GFS, pretty much what we think the GFS is going to stick on is that the system will start to do a northerly turn around this ridge that's here. The other factor is that there's a trough that's going to be it could be either strengthening or weakening, dipping down into the Gulf of Mexico, that could help provide this avenue around in between this ridge as well. So we're not really sure which way that the GFS is going to ultimately go, but it's been pretty persistent on keeping this with a little bit of a turn. Now if we go into the Euro model, we see a slightly different track here. We see that this system enters into the southern Lesser Antilles. You're talking areas like Curacao, cuts across just south of Barbados, which is right here, and cuts in across this area. So if you're along northern Venezuela, this area should be watching the system as well, because the Euro is a pretty good model product, and it's been pretty successful with a lot of tropical systems and tropical cyclones that develop in the eastern Atlantic and central Atlantic, especially even the Gulf of Mexico too. So we always want to keep these two in mind. So the Euro pretty much guides us across northern Venezuela, and at this point, and this is starting to get pretty far out at 96 hours, you're talking 4 days, and then we even get into 5 days, we see that it actually brings it up and across this area. So you know, if the closer it skirts land, the weaker it could become, because it's pretty close to land. But the Euro is going to keep this thing really low and across northern Venezuela. At this point, this is where things become a little bit tricky, because looking at a possible trough setup that dips down into the Gulf of Mexico, and whether or not this strengthens, this is the trough I'm talking about. Here's the high pressure. This is the ridge up here to the northeast, which could give this guidance in between. Or if this fades and heads off in this direction, the path may bring it up a little bit further here up into the Gulf of Mexico. So there's just too many variables right now. When you start getting 96 to 120 hours out, things start to get a little bit erroneous on these models, especially right now. So right now, I think the main goal is to focus on the Caribbean islands. If you're in the Caribbean islands or North Venezuelan coast, you should be watching the system very closely, because it could have some widespread effects to especially the Lesser Antilles, Greater, and maybe even the Greater Antilles in time. But for right now, all these areas need to be watching it. So that's pretty much the gist of it. Here's the track guidance overall, and you can see pretty much the trend to the west over the next at least 48 to 72 hours, and then from there, that's when we start to watch for changes in track and also even in intensity. The longer it's going to take to get out of the Caribbean, or the longer it sits there, is the more time that it will have to strengthen and develop into possible hurricane status. So we'll have to be watching that very, very closely. Here's the intensity models. For right now, at least, the general trend is upwards. Some of them keep it a little bit lower, and they don't develop into a hurricane at least until about 72 to 96 hours. Others develop it a little bit earlier, about 36 to 48 hours. That might be a little bit extreme. I think that's not enough time to develop a hurricane, since it still has a little bit of upper shear and doesn't have a well-defined center right now. That might be a little bit extreme to say, but anything's possible with this system, because it does have healthy rotation on it. It's looking pretty good, and as it enters the Lesser Antilles, we'll know a little bit more. So continue to watch the system over the next 36 to 48 hours, and until then, we'll just continue to watch the model guidance. We'll see what the Euro says tonight at the midnight run. Probably won't be out and ready until about 2:30 a.m., so I'll check it first thing in the morning. But if anything significant changes, I'll let you know. But for right now, the system is not a threat to the United States. It really is only a threat to the Caribbean islands as far as the next 48 hours or so. And until then, I'll touch base again either tomorrow or the next day, and we'll do an update on the system. And thanks for watching. Take care.